Good morning, third graders. And we are here on Wednesday to do our social studies lesson on expanding or going west. Today we want to talk about the main idea for this passage, which is going to be, how did railroads help the growth of the Southwest? So let's take a look at our reading passage for today. Follow along as I read with you. Before railroads arrived, not many people lived in the Southwest. Those who did were rugged pioneers and members of Native American tribes. However, the coming of railroads brought big changes in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. So around the place that we live here in New Mexico, right? In 1869, the first transcontinental railway line was completed. For the first time, railroad tracks stretched across the United States. Over the next few years, more railway lines were built. So, if you think about the transcontinental railway, transcontinental means across the country or across the continent. So we built the first in the United States, the first transcontinental railroad that stretched all the way from the East Coast, right around where New York is, all the way to California, where ocean to ocean meet. So that was a big deal at that time because they wanted to make sure that people could get from one place of our country to the other place of our country quicker, and we could also settle in those areas faster. A quick trip west. This is our heading for this particular part of our passage, and it's a clue to be helping us to understand what that part of our passage is going to be talking about. So let's read. Train travel helped settle the western United States. Before trains, it took 3 months to travel across the country. By train, it took only 8 days to go from New York to San Francisco. Moving west was easier, faster, and safer. More and more people were traveling west. Land was cheap, and the railroad companies made the Southwest sound great to Easterners. The railroads wanted people to settle there. It was good for their business. So think about, how did railroads change the growth of towns in the Southwest? And why did the railroads want people to settle in the Southwest? So if we're thinking about those two questions, in this particular part of our passage, we can answer some of those questions. Before long, new communities began to form along the train lines. Some towns began as camps for railway workers. That's how the city of Odessa, Texas was established or formed. Other older towns, or we could say communities, that had been built far from the railroad were not as lucky. They soon disappeared. Then there were lucky cities like Dallas, Texas. Dallas, Texas grew because of the fact that it was built on a very important railway crossing that was established at that time. It was a hub. So also we need to think about how the railway changed ranching and farming in these communities. Ranchers were able to use the railroad to transport cattle in the 1800s, where before that they had these cattle drives where the ranchers would have to drive their cattle, not with a car, but take them using horses from one part of the country to another part of the country. And that could take days or even months, depending on where they were in the country or where they wanted to go. Farms and industry. Farms also sprang up because of railroads. Trains allowed farmers and ranchers to send crops and meat to the east. and even to other countries. In return, trains delivered manufactured goods to the farms. This exchange turned some communities into shipping centers. Railroads also helped mining industries to grow by connecting mines with factories, which means that they're able to get the products that they need from one place to another much more quickly and more safely. That's why copper mining became very important in Arizona. So here's another place where you can find how did railroads change the growth of towns in the Southwest. We also have to think about farms and industries being part of those communities. Communities are considered our little towns. A flood of people. By the end of the 1800s, the population of the West had grown a lot. Some settlers came from the eastern United States. Large numbers of immigrants, which are people that come from other countries to another country to live, they came from Europe. Some people came from other countries too. Workers from Mexico and China helped build the railway lines. Many built communities in towns and cities of the Southwest. Immigrants brought their knowledge and culture to the Southwest. They brought their traditional food and music, their ways of farming, and their ways of building. Thanks to the railroads, America's culture changed, and the Southwest began a region of diversity, which means that when these new immigrants came into the United States, they brought in many different other traditions and types of music that changed the way people looked at probably the music that they were already listening to or the food that they were already eating. If you notice the question in the beige or tan box, it says, a settler is a person that comes to live in a new place and settle down. Where did settlers of the Southwest come from? So in some cases, you can go back into this part of our passage and think about where did some of the settlers that came to the United States or the Southwest part of the United States, where did they come from? So how did the railroad change the West? Think about the many things that changed as railroads were used more and more. These details are going to help support the main idea. And remember, the main idea of this passage was, how did railroads help the Southwest grow and expand and change? So now you're going to take a look at your questions, and you're going to answer your questions on a sheet of paper. And when you turn these in, you will turn them in next week when you turn in the rest of your materials into Mrs. Badger or myself. So I hope you enjoyed our reading today of Expanding the West using railroads. There is also another link on how the Transcontinental Railroad was built. Take a look at that and you will answer the discussion question for today in your social studies folder today. Have a great Wednesday, guys.